This is Bruce Buffer, and this is the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time for the MMA-Holes!
Mixed martial a-holes. MMA-Holes, 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 MMA-Holes. You like to be a mixed martial a-hole. MMA-Holes, 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 MMA-Holes.
No way.
From the Green Studios of New York, UFC Fight Night 158, Vancouver. Justin Gaethje versus Donald Cerrone, Robert Texeira versus Nikita Krylov. Live with the MMA-Holes.
Hello, my friends. Are you with me? Are you ready for fight briefing?
Welcome, everybody. That's right, JBH is in the house. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to another episode of Fight Briefing number or numero dos. Tonight we are covering UFC Fight Night 158, Justin Gaethje versus Cowboy Cerrone, or UFC Vancouver, or UFC on ESPN Plus 16, whichever you want to call it. We're covering it tonight, and I'm just going to jump right into it. Hello to everybody in the chat. Hello to King K, Manny Mills, Popo Filippo, Anthony Chin, Drunk Savage, Scott McClee, Michael Anzalone, Dawa Dean. Let's talk about it on tonight's card. Well, we're actually going to discuss the main card, my friends. You know what's funny? Just as I said that, everything went out on me. Imagine getting everything set up, and then everything goes out. Just like that. But don't worry, because I've got this all under control. I've learned how to fix situations like this. Like a freaking pro. Right? Let's talk about who's on the card tonight. Or to Saturday night, I guess you could call it. All right. We've got Misha Cirkunov versus Jimmy Crute, the first fight of the main card. Uriah Hall versus Antonio Carlos Jr. Michel Pereira. This fight was almost canceled. We'll get a little bit into that. His opponent backed out because of visa issues, but they luckily found him a new opponent there. No faces, but they did find him an opponent, so we'll talk about it. Todd Duffee versus Jeff Hughes, Glover Teixeira versus Nikita Krylov, and Donald Cerrone versus Justin Gaethje. These are the fights on the main card for UFC Fight Night 158 tonight. So we'll get into that. And I'm being told from from Drunk Savage to turn my mic up, but I am on full blast here, my friend. I hate to break it to you. All right. I'm excited for this card, guys. I am excited for this card. I honestly, it kind of sucks to say, but I actually feel like this card might be better than UFC 242 was. It's unfortunate. I was excited for 242, but I think I'm a little more excited for this one. So I'm going to hop right into it and let you guys get to see some of the briefings. If we are going to talk about the card as a whole, I think that this is a card that you guys don't want to miss. This fight is, well, Justin Gaethje versus Cowboy alone is literally everything that's beautiful about this sport. I love it so much. I think the UFC matchmakers completely nailed it in putting these two together inside the octagon. They're two top-class lightweights who are literally going to make one hell of an explosion. I have no doubt about it. Now, I believe that no self-respecting fan, and my mic is very low, but it's on full blast. I don't know what to tell you. It's on full blast. Mystic Moss might be able to come in here for a second and help me with that, but it is on full blast. These are two top class lightweights who are gonna make like a great fight for the night. Here comes Mystic Moss, coming to say hello, fix the problem here. Whoa, that's blasting, Moss. That is testing. Testes.
You're not redlining.
Testes, Moss.
Why the fuck you so low?
Mystic Moss is here to assist me.
What'd you do?
I
Use my mic.
did absolutely fucking nothing.
Use my mic. This is like it's like the A side. What the fuck's going on here? It's like the A side.
Testes, Mystic Moss. This one's low as well. I did absolutely fucking nothing. Mike is good, said Manny Mills. He said it was good.
That's really low.
This one's low. He said that one was good.
Okay, go back to the other one. The fuck? Why are you so low?
Testes, Moss. Testes. You can hear me. It's fine.
You talking into the front?
Yeah, I am indeed, sir. Thanks for asking. It's perfect, they say. All right. Anyways, let's talk about the fight tonight. Yeah, they say it's fine. They're saying it's good, so no big deal. All right. I want to talk about the fights. I want to talk about starting from the first fight, but just as an overall card. I really think that whether you're a diehard fan or beginner in the sport, I absolutely think that you should tune in on Saturday night, because these are fights that you're not going to want to miss, especially the main event and the co-main event are great. But you know what? There's Todd Duffee is on the card tonight. That's going to be an excellent fight to talk about. So we'll just get right into it. Misha Cirkunov versus Jimmy Crute is the first fight on the main card. Cirkunov, he is currently on a 1-fight losing streak. He just came off of a loss, in fact, to Johnny Walker. And I remember the reaction to this fight. Johnny Walker went in with that flying knee and the punches literally 36 seconds into the first round, and Cirkunov was out of there. He was out. Now, Cirkunov does have a 4-5-0 record, but I honestly... I don't know if that's really going to make much of a difference here when it comes to Jim Crute. Cirkunov is a massively muscled light heavy. That's something to keep in mind. He tore through his opponents earlier on in the UFC. He has powerful striking. He has a tight groundwork. Now, granted, he wasn't the most flowing striker. He does throw a lot of stiff punches, and for some fighters, that actually is a disadvantage. But he has a lot of power, Cirkunov. He has a lot of power, so I don't think that him having the stiff punches does much of a disadvantage for him, so you can't really kill him for that, because that type of style actually aided him in his fights against Krylov, who is another extremely heavy hitter, and we'll talk about him in one of the fights that we'll talk about down the road. But it aided him against Krylov, it aided him against Nikita Krylov, who is on the co-main event of this card, and Alex Nicholson, who's actually a friend of the show. So I think that type of fighting skill is all right for Cirkunov. I think it aids him a little bit more. Then he fought Glover Teixeira, who is also on the card tonight. And something about his fighting style in that fight it just looked completely off to me. He was mauled to the ground by Glover, and then he lost. He lost by a TKO. But in his last fight, when he was stopped by Johnny Walker, that was also in extremely violent fashion. Now, he did bounce back before the Johnny Walker fight, and he did submit Patrick Cummings, but it wasn't enough to really make up for some of those things, those downfalls in his career, right? So things haven't really gone well for Cirkunov as of late. But I wouldn't go as far as calling it a bust just yet. I still think that he has a lot of talent. And if his striking does improve, which we won't know until we see him get in the cage, but if it does improve in terms of his defensive skills and his ability to string together more combinations, I think he could definitely rise back up in the rankings. And I firmly believe that his chin and his overall toughness, those are the only two things that would be a definite worry for him going into this fight with Crute. Now, let's talk about Crute. Crute is on a 10-fight winning streak, fighting a fighter who just came off of a loss. 10-fight winning streak and also undefeated. His last fight was against Sam Alvey. We all saw that. Sam Alvey was no longer smiling at the end of that fight. He won by punches in round 1. It was about 2-3 minutes into round 1. He won. He's a tricky fighter to get a handle on. I think he came back into the UFC off of an impressive KO on Dana White's Contender Series, and we all saw that. And then he won sort of sloppy, but it was exciting, a grappling match with Paul Craig. And that was before knocking out Sam Alvey in February. So he does have the grappling. He's well-rounded. He's clearly an athletically talented fighter, but he's still extremely raw. He still hasn't really honed everything he needs skill-wise in order to fight an opponent like Cirkunov. But if we were to go back to Cirkunov's latest downfalls, that's not going to be a huge problem for Crute. That being said, I really feel that Crute could have bitten off more than he can chew in this fight in particular. I think if the fight were coming in a couple of years down the road, then maybe I would give Crute a huge chance of winning, because Cirkunov would be falling out of his prime. He would slow down. He wouldn't have that type of skill and strategy that he has right now. But for me, this is just a step too far at this stage in the game for Crute. And Cirkunov is just far more experienced, right? He's more polished. And although he is coming off of a loss, he's beaten guys like Crute before. So I think bottom line for this fight, given that Crute got into issues on the ground against Craig, who isn't as good as a grappler as Cirkunov is, I think that this should be Cirkunov's fight. If he can get Crute to the ground, since Crute was more willing to duel on the mat with Craig, I honestly don't think he'll have issues attempting to do the same with Cirkunov, but Cirkunov will definitely out-grapple him, so my pick for this fight is definitely going to be Cirkunov, and I think he's going to win by submission. Now, the next fight on the card, we have Uriah Hall versus Antonio Carlos Jr. Now, I am excited for this fight. I'm excited for this fight for a couple of reasons. One, I think a lot of people are downplaying Uriah Hall, and I don't know why, and I'll get into that. And two, this is just an all-out, I think this is going to be an all-out slugfest. I think that these are two very well-rounded fighters. Carlos Jr. is coming off of a loss, right? Uriah Hall is coming off of a win. Carlos Jr. has a 10-3-0 record with 1 no contest, and his last fight was to none other than Ian Heinisch, who we first got to see in Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Ian Heinisch is a fucking animal. That kid is a beast. He goes in the cage, and he's in it to knock you out. That is his sole purpose when he gets inside that cage, is to completely destroy you with the power behind his punches. So it's no surprise to me that Jr. lost to Ian Heinisch. But what did surprise me was that he lost by unanimous decision. I expected for Ian Heinisch to knock Jr. out, and he didn't. So you have to give some credit to Carlos Jr. on that one. Carlos Jr., his nickname, the Shoe Face, he's not a great striker by any means. So you would expect someone like Ian Heinisch to outstrike Jr., but he didn't. He has power, but his problem is not the power behind his punches, it is his strategy. The way he goes into these brawls with other fighters. He tends to wing huge shots from the outside, and more than anything else. On the ground, that's where he excels the most. Yeah, his best bet is to take his opponents to the ground. He's a high-level BJJ black belt, something to keep in mind, and his skills to submit basically anyone in the division is so high that that's something that he should capitalize. Simply pull in the Khabib, the skill set of Khabib and try and take them to the ground. Honestly, the biggest weakness that he's quite possibly in the wrong division. That's probably his biggest weakness. He is a guy who used to be a heavyweight, and 185 is a huge. I mean, he's pretty big for 185, but I can't kill him for looking for that physical advantage because, in fairness, most of you know I am a Khabib fan. And Khabib walks around at that 180 pounds, whatever he walks around at, up in that higher area, and he's cutting down to 155 to get that physical advantage. So I am not opposed to that at all. In my opinion, as long as you can professionally make the weight, have at it. Go for it. But there is one consequence to him doing this that a lot of fighters who cut that much weight sort of experience, and that's his gas tank. I think that was a problem for him, or it was not a problem for him for his last 5 fight winning streaks, but because he was mostly faced with opponents with a similar skill set, it was a little bit easier for him. Stylistically, they matched well. With losses to Dan Kelly and Ian Heinisch, they both stemmed from him running out of steam. If you go back and watch those fights, his gas tank just let up. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that his opponents did not match up with him stylistically. They outstroke him. I mean, these opponents were heavy strikers, and he just didn't have the gas tank to keep up with it. And similar issues against Marvin Vettori, too, in the fight that we saw him take a close decision. So that's something that he's going to have to pay attention to, especially being walking around at a heavyweight weight and trying to cut to 185. Now, when it comes to Uriah Hall, for all the issues were always believed to be his mentality, right? A lot of people put Hall down because he didn't have the mentality going into the fight. But in reality, I honestly don't think it's true. Nobody with a poor mentality would survive in the UFC in the first place. Uriah Hall has. So, and for as long as he has, Uriah Hall. So I highly disagree with the whole mentality argument. The reality is likely that Hall is simply inconsistent. That's all. His mentality's fine. He's just inconsistent. He's never quite mastered the all-around skills to match the natural physical abilities. So, he's 35 years old now. Some could argue that he's starting to hit that part where he's out of his prime. But I disagree. I think that he's still there. He's still got what it takes. And he isn't likely going to change or develop any further. He knows where he excels. He knows where he doesn't excel, and I think he's going to stick to where he's comfortable. So realistically, he's an extremely dangerous striker, and he's got explosive power. He's got a lot of power behind those punches, and he has an extremely unfortunate habit of being like completely lulled into a slow pace. So his chin has also been cracked at this point, so that's something else that we have to keep in mind. But bottom line to this entire fight, basically, this fight should come down to whether Carlos Jr. can get Hall to the ground, and early on in the fight for good measure. If he can get this to the ground, then this would be a winnable fight for him. Hall, on the other hand, he's not like a wizard from the back. He's athletically gifted, but I think when dealing with another level grappler like this, it comes down to Carlos Jr. And if Jr. can get the fight down, then, he's going to be in a little bit of trouble. Hall still does hit and kick extremely hard. We have to remember that. Like, I don't want to put Hall down here. I don't think on the ground he would do well with Jr., but he is an incredible hitter and an incredible kicker. So, and he's far more nuanced striker than Carlos Jr. is. So, based on the fact that Jr.'s takedowns aren't the best in the division, if Hall can defend a couple of the early ones, then Jr. might become tired and then become a sitting duck because, like I said, the weight cut, his gas tank could be a problem. This could honestly go either way, this fight. But I'm thinking that if Hall stops some of the early takedowns, then Jr. gets tired and then, can pick him off. Hall can pick him off for a decision. So my pick for this fight would be Uriah Hall. Let me know who you guys have in the chat, Uriah Hall or Carlos Jr. Now, I did give Uriah Hall by decision because I feel that that's the only way he's going to be able to pick off Carlos Jr. But who knows? For all we know, he knocks the guy out. Like I said, he's got powerful strikes and powerful kicks, so not impossible. Pixelated Vigo says, my foot was a balloon, I tell ya.
My foot was a balloon.
Brian Redband, Uriah, y'all decision. In your dreams, Moss, LOL. Drunk Savage says he just needs one good kick and it's over like in the Gegard fight. Vlad says Hall. Ann H. Carlos by submission first round. I got Uriah Carlos Jr. says Herman Smith. Pulse resurrected. Me and Uriah goes back like babies and pacifiers. Cameron Moore says, where's the dude at? Where's the dude at? What are you talking about? Mr. Chocolate Bean says Carlos Jr. rear naked choke or rear necked choke. Shannon Stewart Hall. Michael Anzalone has Hall. Does anyone know if Justin or Cowboy has been talking trash? Big Brett says why people act like there's no such thing as a BWC. Post Resurrected says ODB. All right. So I got you guys' picks for that fight. We're going to move on to the next fight. We're briefing through this, guys. We're tightening it up. The next fight is Michel Pereira versus Tristan Connelly. Interesting. So Michel Pereira versus Tristan Connelly now have a picture, but originally didn't have a picture. All right, let's get into this one. Now, this fight was supposed to be canceled. Yes. Michel Pereira was supposed to be fighting, what's his name? It's a Russian name. He was supposed to be fighting him. Kadoshko, his name was. Sergey Kadoshko, who was supposed to be Michel Pereira's opponent, but he had visa issues, so he ultimately had to pull out of the fight. Luckily, this fight was not canceled. They did find another opponent in Tristan Connelly, and this is very interesting to me because Tristan Connelly is kind of making his debut right now. I mean, if there's one way to do it, it's this way. But let's get into Pereira first. He's on a 3-fight winning streak right now. His MMA record is 23-9-0 with 2 no contests, and his last fight was a win by flying knees and punches in the first round to Danny Roberts. Now, Pereira is still relatively new to the UFC. He just made his debut back in May of this year. So don't think that just because this is Connelly's debut that Pereira is going to have any advantage. This is Pereira's first debut, Pereira's, I think, second fight or something like that in the UFC. So he did knock out Danny Roberts, and I got to say this. According to MMA Fighting, and I just want to give a shout out to MMA Fighting for this one because I didn't find it anywhere else. This fighter is rather unorthodox, and they quoted him as occasionally acrobatic in his performances, which is very interesting to me because you don't really hear those things about any other fighter or in any of their fights with anyone else. Regardless, Pereira has some clear finishing power. We've seen it in his resume before, along with a lot more experience inside the cage, given his record. Not given how many times he fought in the UFC, just given his record. The guy has a lot of power behind his punches. He's slightly well-rounded, but really good on the feet. He's got knockout power. He loves to finish his fights. Connelly, on the other hand, is on a 4-fight win streak as well. He's 13-6-0, so he's got a little catching up to do when it comes to Pereira. His last fight was at RFC, and he did win by unanswered blows in round 5. Now, he is the lone Canadian on the main card. I know some people were saying Todd Duffee was Canadian, but they didn't mark him as Canadian on the main card. Connelly is 33 years old, so he's sort of hitting that peak of his career right now. And he's taken this fight on extremely, extremely short notice. He replaced Kadoshko, and like I said, Kadoshko had visa issues. But to take a fight this early, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. But I don't give him a lot of disadvantage here. I mean, we've never seen him fight in the UFC before. This is his debut, but given his record, he's a complete finisher, both on the ground and on the feet. We have an extremely well-rounded fighter like Connelly who's completely hungry for a notable spot in the UFC rankings. And this is not someone that Pereira should take lightly, in my opinion. Like, when you have someone who's coming in who's a fucking finisher and who's that well-rounded, right? I mean, their only goal is going to be to completely finish you and move their way up in the ranking, and I think that's exactly what Connelly has in mind for this fight. That being said, we do have to consider that Connelly is moving up in a weight class, and Pereira is a gigantic welterweight, which could be a disadvantage because of the size difference here for Connelly. Now, I know a lot of people might be picking Pereira for this fight, and rightfully so, but I have an itching feeling here that Connelly is going to go deep in this fight, and he's going to try and surprise us all, and I think that he will. I think he has the power in his punch, and I think he can take care of himself on the ground should Pereira ever try and put pressure on him, which I don't think he would. So in this fight, I am actually going to go with the short notice UFC debut in Tristan Connelly. Let me know who you guys have in the chat. Herman Smith says, itchy. And H runs the thread, bitches, says Herman Smith. I don't see an upset in this one, says Drunk Savage. Tough decision for me, Popo. It is a tough decision. Like I said, rightfully so, people would be picking Pereira, but don't underestimate the kid. I mean, he's good. He's good. It's called briefing because JBH is doing it in her briefs. Surely she wouldn't use such a generic name. Yes, it's because I'm doing it in my briefs. Don't be a hater. Cheeto says, LOL, going deep, amazing. Says, I agree with the Connelly pick. These new guys don't give a fook. Brian Redband, Michel Pereira for the win. Dawadine says, Wei Li Zhang. And I missed the rest. Sorry, I missed it. JBH sold me. Connelly, says Heavy Micro. Chef Arts Torres says, she don't know shit. Wait, I gotta yell it like him. She don't know shit. She needs to just be naked because nobody wants to hear her bullshit breakdown. How'd I do that? Good? Did I nail it? All right. Let's move on to the next fight so I can tell you more about the shit that I don't know. Todd Duffee versus Jeff Hughes. This one actually has a lot of hype around it. Todd Duffee's currently on a 1-fight losing streak. He did come off a loss to Frank Mir back in 2015. Guys, 4 years ago is the last time Duffee fought in the UFC, and he did lose by a knockout. His pro MMA record is 9-3-0. Like I said, he hasn't fought in over 4 years. He literally shot into the scene in the UFC with a UFC record-breaking 7-second knockout of Tim Hague. That's fucking crazy. That's how he launched himself into the UFC. From then, I think we all thought it was completely undeniable that he would eventually get some sort of title contention shot. But that didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. Duffee was knocked out by Mike Russo in the third round of his next fight, dominating for his first 2 rounds. But more importantly, leading into his release, him and Dana White had a lot of controversy. There were a lot of butting heads going on there. So since they weren't getting along, it kind of led to like an odd outing for Todd Duffee. He then moved over to Dream, and he faced Alistair Overeem over there and found himself knocked out again. Not looking good for Duffee so far. Now remember, that was back in 2010, so that was 9 years ago that he did get knocked out by Overeem, but he didn't fight again until 2012, 2 years later. He returned to the UFC. He won in that return by knockout, and just when it felt like Duffee's career was starting to get squared away and you know, kind of look its way up, he gets this thing called Parsonage-Turner syndrome, which is like it's nerve damage, and it affects the nerves and stuff in your shoulders and your arm, and it's extremely painful. And he had to go through that for about 2 years. He then returned in 2014 with another knockout, but then he fought in a super sloppy way against Frank Mir, and guess what happens? He gets knocked out again. What the fuck? He gets knocked out again. Needless to say, Duffee, he's not in the best of luck when it comes to his career, but at the same time, he's a go-for-broke fight. Like, he'll go in there, and his main objective is to knock you out, right? But if it's not to knock the other fighter out, then it's for the other fighter to knock him out. And I heard that. I have to credit Mystic Moss for that quote because he said it perfectly. This guy, he is an animal when he goes into the cage, but man, everyone's so hyped up on this guy, and it's crazy if you look at, you know, his career and the knockouts and the people that he's faced. Now, I will give him credit. He faced some pretty hefty fighters in his division, so it's not like he was facing cans and they were just knocking him out. No, these were heavy strikers. You know, these were heavy opponents he was facing, so you got to give him that. Now, when it comes to Hughes, Jeff Hughes, he is coming off of a loss right now. He's 10-2-0, and his last fight was against Maurice Green, but he lost it by split decision. And there was a controversy in that fight. I don't know how many of you remember. There was a controversy to the split decision of that fight. Now, he's had just as normal of a career as pretty much every other, or the rest of the heavyweights that you see, with a few minor differences, right? He's a big dude. He hits relatively hard. He's got a lot of power behind his punches, but he's not in the best shape of his life, as are most heavies and light heavies, but this guy specifically. And more importantly, he's probably more sloppy than Duffee was than Duffee's ever been. When Duffee came in heavyweight, he was pretty sloppy before he moved down to 205. His UFC debut was against Maurice Green, and we all remember him from The Ultimate Fighter. The problem with this fight, though, and I think a lot of us can agree with this, is that he never really showed us anything to make us really believe that he could find himself in that higher elite level in the UFC, right? So I think bottom line for this fight, let me just start by saying that heavyweight is extremely unpredictable. Even if, there are some flaws in the games of both of these fighters, they still pack a pretty heavy punch in both of them. It's also easy to say that Duffee is going to walk into one of those punches and Hughes gets, one of them gets KO'd because the other one walked into a heavy punch. But honestly, I think that's just too easy to say. I honestly think that Duffee does have a speed advantage over Hughes. I think Hughes is a little bit more of a sloppy fighter than Duffee. I also think that given Duffee hits much heavier than Hughes does, I think he beats Hughes to the punch with his speed. And I think it allows Duffee to have that ultimate advantage to a KO or a TKO. So hopefully he'll stick around this time in his career. He's still relatively young for heavyweight. But overall, I think my pick is going to be Duffee by a KO or a TKO. Let me know who you guys have in the chat for this fight. Chef Arcturus says, where's your baby dick? Pink balls have ginger pink sidekick faggot partner. What the fuck does that mean? Do you speak English? That doesn't even make any sense. Brian Redman says, Duffee first round KO. Heavy Microgrow pro tip. Chrome to your dome says, this dude looks like that guy we rated the other night. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Clayton Duffee says, how old is Duffee? He's 33, I believe, or 35. Let me just double check that for you guys. Let's head over here to Google Zoom. See how old Todd Duffee is. I believe he's 35. Let me just make sure. No, 33. I was right the first time. 33. 33 years old is Todd Duffee. I won't trip out though, says Jean-Paul Lescott. Tommaso says, what's the time or the line again? Love this. JVH, thanks. What's the line again? Let me show you real quick what the line is. So we have Misha Cirkunov versus Jimmy Crute, Uriah Hall versus Antonio Carlos Jr., Michel Pereira versus Tristan Connelly, Todd Duffee versus Jeff Hughes, which is who we were just talking about. We're going to move on to Glover Teixeira versus Nikita Krylov, and the main event, Donald Cerrone versus Justin Gaethje. So we just finished up Duffee. I was getting from you guys, see 3 booms there. I was getting from you guys who you had in the fight, but now let's move on. You guys want to move on? We'll move on to the next fight here. The next fight, we have Glover Teixeira versus Nikita Krylov. Now, I am excited for this fight for a couple reasons. One, we had Glover Teixeira on the show. He was awesome. He was just an awesome guy. He was, really kind. He just, jumped in with that interview with Moss. Just an awesome guy altogether. And he took the joke lightly when Moss mentioned the Corey Anderson fight and everything. So just an awesome dude. Also, Krylov is an animal. Just like Teixeira, Krylov's an animal. I also think that this is going to be an interesting fight to talk about because some people are talking about Glover Teixeira kind of falling out of his prime a little bit, and I kind of disagree with that right now, so we'll get into it. Glover Teixeira, currently on a 2-fight winning streak, 29-7-0. His last fight was against Ian Cutelaba by rear naked choke in the second round. When I mentioned the out of the prime thing, I personally don't think that he's on his way out like some people are saying. I don't. You could argue that Corey Anderson did give him a pretty good beating. He wrestled Glover. He put tremendous amounts of pressure on Glover in order to literally just provide a million strikes. Glover was also hurt by Carl Robertson before taking him down, but neither man knocked him out. Nobody thought of that. Neither man knocked him out, nor did Cutelaba, who I had mentioned previously, who hit him with some ridiculously heavy shots before running out of steam in their fight back in April, I believe. So neither of those two fighters knocked him out. And then you've got someone like Ian Cutelaba, who's got like insane power behind his striking. And even he couldn't put Texeira away. So essentially, Texeira, in my opinion, is the same fighter as he always was. He's got extremely heavy hands, a solid wrestling game. He's got serviceable takedowns. And he's got a phenomenal top game with extremely dangerous strikes and submission skills. And we have to take that into consideration. And I think that just because he's a little slower now, you know, I think it's not enough to say he's beginning to reach the end of his prime. I don't think he's out just yet. Sure, maybe he's slowed down a little bit, but his skill has not depleted. His speed has, well, I guess you could say he's slowed down with some of the striking, but the power behind his strikes have not depleted. So I don't shit on that just yet. When it comes to Krylov, he is coming off of one win. He's 26-6-0, and his last fight was a win by rear naked choke to OSP, Ovince Pro. Krylov is such an entertaining story to me. And I'll tell you why. When I was doing research on this guy, when he first came into the UFC, he was a complete brawler at heavyweight, right? But he was messy. He was sloppy. A brawler, but sloppy. He moved down to light heavy later on. And then just like that, he gets in better shape. His skills improve extremely. And he becomes one of the most skilled and deadly athletes in the light heavy division. And then what happens? Misha Cirkunov submitted him, and he left the UFC for the Russia scene. Just like that. He was one of the best light heavies. He gets submitted, and then he leaves. And I think this was a huge shock to everyone, considering the fact that his rising profile, the fact that he was so good in light heavy, but apparently he had requested the break from the UFC to gain more experience without traveling too much. So it wasn't like a slap in the face to UFC fans. He just wanted to make sure he was closer to home and able to train there. That didn't stop him though. He did come back last year, and he got submitted again by Jan Blachowicz. So not the best of luck for for Krylov right now, but give him a chance, you know. But bottom line to this fight, I think Krylov is literally going to try and catch Glover Texeira with a flurry of punches. I mean, that's what he's good at. He likes to come in, you know. He does have the strategy and the striking and the power behind his punches. So I think he's going to come in and he's going to try and blast Texeira with like right off the bat. I think that's what he's going to do. I think he's got the speed advantage for it. But if we take into consideration Glover's fight against Cutelaba, I think that since Cutelaba is also a heavy striker like Krylov was, he caught Glover multiple times and Glover still never went down. And I had said this previously. I think Glover is going to catch him, and I think he's going to catch him with some heavy strikes earlier on, and then we're going to see him try to submit Krylov from the top position. I really think that's going to happen. He's going to eat some of those shots by Krylov, and then Glover's gonna go for that takedown, and I think he's gonna finish him on the ground. So my pick is Texeira by submission. All right, let me know what you guys have in the chat. Chrome to Dome says Cowboy has never beat a Mexican. Sorry, Ann. NH says yes, he has. NH also says Mexi and Blood Drunk Savage King K Cowboy beat a black man, and Mike Perry. Clayton Fitzgerald says Glover would have to be in his late 30s by now, right? Kung Fu Hamster says he's slot to Ferguson and half Mexican Diaz. Pedophilia says Cowboy beat a Mexican 2 fights ago. Dawadine. Tony Ferguson hasn't fought Connor, Dustin, or even Gaethje. At least fight Gaethje, not the other two. Kevin Lee fight almost lost Castillo. Fight almost lost, got knocked down by Pettis, a journeyman. Brian Redman says Krylov 3rd round KO. La Femme Nikita says post resurrected. Chef Do the Truffle Shuffle says Ann H. Islam Makhachev, Khabib's friend, deserves to fight Cowboy or Felder. Do you agree? Deserves to fight Cowboy or Felder? Yeah, I mean Makhachev's alright. I don't know if he deserves to fight maybe Felder. I could see him fighting Felder. King K says, Ann H. Cowboy ain't beat a Latino since he was 6. All the Mexican comments. Yep. Cowboy winning this fight. Dawoudine says Islam Makhachev. I read that Javi Microgro says Glover is not too old for this. Shh, I agree. Like I said, I just don't think he's falling out of his prime. I think it's a little unfair to say that Teixeira's falling out of his prime for this fight. Look at who he's fighting. I mean, Nikita Krylov's good, but he's not good enough for Glover. All right, let's move on to the last fight, the main event of the evening. Donald Cowboy Cerrone versus Justin Gaethje. Let's start off with Cowboy Cerrone. Cowboy Cerrone is coming off a loss, as you guys remember, Tony Ferguson by doctor stoppage. Very unfortunate. Some people say that he did it on purpose. Some others say that it was just a fluke incident. I'd love to know what you guys think. Donald Cerrone had a broken nose, and his eye was already pretty damaged. And between rounds, Cerrone blew his nose, and his eyeball blew up like a balloon. And they had to cancel that fight against Tony Ferguson. And he acted all disappointed and this and that. Now, I'm not going to give you my opinion as to what he did or didn't do, because at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know if he did it on purpose. I'm not going to speculate. You know, stranger shit's happened. Maybe he was so wrapped up in the fight that he just forgot, that he shouldn't blow his nose. Who fucking knows? I'm not going to get into that. But if you want to tell me, whether or not you think he did it on purpose, we'll save that for another time. But regardless, he still lost by doctor stoppage to Tony Ferguson. But don't let that put it past the fact that Cowboy is an absolute gold mine for the UFC. Like, I know that was very controversial, but he is a great fighter. He is like the badass of badasses in the UFC. So in my opinion, I think against Justin Gaethje, I truly believe, even though he's a badass, he's going to need everything in his arsenal to fight against Gaethje if he wants to win. And I'll tell you why. There is no question about Cowboy's toughness. We've seen it. After all, he has literally never been knocked out, not once in his career. Something else to keep in mind is that he owns the record for most wins in the UFC and the most finishes in the history of the promotion, which is that's fucking incredible. Remember I told you this fight was going to be something special in the beginning? Cowboy is an exceptionally gifted striker, and he's an exceptionally gifted Muay Thai background. So the kicks, I mean, he loves those head kicks, those kicks to the body. He'll chop you down with his kicks. I know, I see Blue Couture.
My foot was a balloon.
I honestly don't think that he's showing any signs of slowing down anytime soon. His conditioning is outstanding. We've seen that. It's helpful because he's able to throw rapid shots, and he's able to lay it on his opponent when he wants to, and he's able to lay it on his opponent with a lot of volume. And that's extremely important when it comes to someone like Justin Gaethje. He has a good understanding of his own body rhythm, and we saw that in his previous fights. It gives him like this incredible reading of like distance and range. And those are extremely important for Cowboy because it helps him get that higher edge over his opponents. That's why we see him win. Now, Cowboy did take some losses in his career as well, Darren Till being one of them. So that's pretty unfortunate. But I think that if Gaethje were to take on some of what Darren Till did, and I'll explain what they were, he might actually have a chance in this fight. So let's talk about Gaethje. He's on a 2-fight winning streak. His last fight was a win against Edson Barboza. We all remember that one, a right hook in round 1. We actually talked about this one when we went over the Barboza fight last week for UFC 242. Gaethje is also 22-0, an incredible record. But he heads into this Cerrone clash off the back of 2 first-round knockout wins. Like I said, Edson Barboza. Don't forget James Vick. Gaethje is violence. He goes in there to fucking kill, right? He has 17 KOs on his resume. He has 2 losses in 20 bouts on his resume. So the guy's just as much an animal as Cowboy. I think he's a hell of a fighter to watch, and I think he lives to fight. But despite being a high-level wrestler, we've never really been able to see him wrestle. We all know he prefers to stay on the feet. He prefers to be aggressive. I just don't want people to forget that he does have that wrestling background. It's so important because that could be one of the advantages that he has over Cowboy. But Cowboy's very well-rounded as well. So just because Cowboy's good with the kicks and the strikes you know, they can both be well-rounded should it come down to that. And just because, you know, he's aggressive and fiery, it doesn't mean that he's a dumb fighter. I know a lot of people say that because he goes in, he doesn't protect his head. I've even said it. He doesn't protect his head enough. But this guy, he's strategic with his strikes. So even if he doesn't protect his head, he's got a good chin on him, and he's strategic. In fact, I honestly think that he's one of the only fighters on the roster with the capability of forcing his opponents to drop their plans and fight the way that he wants them to fight. So I know I've said it before, and I just mentioned how he doesn't protect his head, but he comes forward relentlessly, pressuring his opponent with flurries of shots, right? He swings extremely wild, and he frequently lands. He's a strategic striker. So bottom line for this fight, for me, I think that Gaethje should pull a little bit from the background of his Barbosa fight. If he can walk Cerrone down in the same fashion that he did with Barbosa, and if he can get him into the fence and get those deadly body shots and those head shots in, then I think he can set up a knockout similar to the one that Darren Till did. And this goes to where I was talking about the whole Darren Till thing. Darren Till was literally able to unleash on Cowboy back in 2017, and it's because he put that pressure on Cowboy back to the fence. So I'd love to see Cowboy pull this one off, but for me, I really think this is Gaethje's fight. So I'm going to go Gaethje by TKO. I'm going to do it. All right, let me know who you guys have in the chat right now. Chrome T-Dome says, also remember he outkicked Barbosa. Herman Smith, Cowboy should go bare knuckle. Popo Filippo says, a tough call for me. Cowboy says, Bruce Gullickson. King K says, that's how everyone beats pressure. Cowboy, I like them both, but going with Justin. Cowboy's eye was a B. Cowboy's eye was a balloon, says Pedophilia.
My foot was a balloon.
Cowboy, JBH knows something. I missed the rest, I'm sorry. It's going pretty fast tonight. Justin doesn't have the right kind of pressure. If Gaethje does get it done in one, Cowboy got this by head kick. When is PFL playoffs? October. Cowboy wins by KO in the 4th round, but 2nd round KO. Cowboy can't handle pressure fighters, says Kevin. I agree. Eduardo says, who cuts the background in the fighters' photos? UFC. Cowboy is a faggot. LOL. Can't do it too. Tough pick. I like them both as well, says CC Sports Fan. This is a tough pick. And that's sort of what I was going into in the beginning of this entire show was this is going to be one hell of a fight. It's going to be a hell of a fight because you've got two extremely gifted, extremely talented fighters going into the octagon, and it's going to be incredible. I have zero complaints about this main card at all. Like I said, I think it's going to be better than the UFC 242 card. There's a lot of great fights on here, so I'm excited to see what happens. But with that being said, I don't have any updates to the card aside from the fact that Michel Pereira's fight has not been canceled. He does have an opponent now against Tristan Connelly. But there's really they did the open workouts for UFC Fight Night 158 or UFC Vancouver. Life on autopilot!
Wonderful, wonderful breakdown.
Thank you, Life on Autopilot. Thank you. Cheers. I truly appreciate it. Thanks, Life. Yeah, that's it. I don't have any other updates for you guys. I'll read a little bit from the chat, and then I'm going to let you guys go. This was your fight briefing for the night. Taha Van Shipman, Gaethje is the anti-Colby. 100% agree. Looking at Self, Cowboy is one of the highest paid fighters in the UFC. Popo Filippo with the... Oh, I almost forgot.
I've got 50 likes. You've got 50 likes. We've got 50 likes. MMA-Holes 50 likes. I've got 50 likes. You've got 50 likes. We've got 50 likes. MMA-Holes 50 likes. I've got 50 likes. You've got 50 likes. We've got 50 likes. MMA-Holes 50 likes. The dislikes can choke on a dick.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining me tonight for the UFC Vancouver fight briefing. Or
Fight briefing.
I will see you guys again next week on Thursday to cover the next fight that we will be watching that Saturday night. But more importantly, we will be live tomorrow night for Fuka Friday starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mystic Moss and I will be playing the points game. We'll be having some fun over there. So make sure you guys tune in for that. And yeah, we'll see you guys then. Hope you guys enjoyed the fight briefing show. I'll miss you guys. And as always, don't be an a-hole. Be an MMA-Hole.